the streets in the city are potentially the largest public space that the city has. And yet we're allocating 70 to 80% of that to vehicle movement and storage, which we don't think is the best use of that space.
I'm John Lewis, and you're listening to 360 Degree City, a podcast where we talk to all kinds of folks that are making life in cities better. Our hope is at the end of each episode, you'll start to see your own city from a slightly different angle. In North American cities, there are 4 parking stalls for every vehicle. Downtown cores usually devote 30% of their space for parking, and the average car sits stationary for 95% of its life. That's a lot of space for vehicle storage. Do you ever wonder how all that asphalt could be used differently? How a parking stall could be transformed into a place for people to enjoy? We wanted to talk to someone who makes us rethink how space in cities could be used.
My name is John Bela, and I'm an urban designer based in San Francisco, currently working for a company named Gel, which is an urban design consultancy based in Copenhagen.
John was previously a principal member at Rebar, which was an art and design studio in San Francisco. While at Rebar, John and his team co-founded the urbanist holiday, Parking Day. Occurring annually on the third Friday of September, Parking Day is an open-source global event. On this day, citizens, artists, organizations, professionals transform parking spaces into temporary public spaces. In 2005, John collaborated with a creative group of people to create a project called Parking. It was a guerrilla art intervention in San Francisco, and this is where, when, and how Parking Day originated.
And the inspiration for Parking comes from actually a project by Gordon Matta Clark, who was an artist and an architect working active in New York in the 1970s. And Matta Clark, one of his many works was a project called Odd Lots or Fake Estates, where Matta Clark acquired a number of parcels of land that were created as the result of surveying errors. So as land was surveyed, in Queens and the various boroughs in New York and resurveyed over decades, there were inevitable errors in the surveying process, which resulted in a set of very oddly shaped parcels of land, like a 1 foot by 1 foot square, or a 2 foot wide by 100 foot sliver of land. And Matta Clark managed to he bought all of these back in auction. And he proposed a whole series of interventions on them. Matta Clark died relatively young as an artist, and none of the work was ever realized. But that project, called Fake Estates or Odd Lots, was documented in a magazine article in the Art and Culture Quarterly called Cabinet Magazine, their land issue. And Matthew Passmore showed me that issue, and we both got really inspired by this idea that there were these unscripted fragments of real estate in the urban context that might invite new possibilities, right? That they weren't subject to the kind of land use code or, some kind of commercial value proposition. They actually, were these invitations to think creatively about how we use urban space in cities. And so we began searching for these fragments or sliver spaces in San Francisco. We never encountered vacant lots, although that would come later, actually, with the economic downturn, a bunch of vacancy in San Francisco. But in 2004, 2005, we didn't encounter any vacant lots, but we came across the parking space, and we started to think about that as an underutilized space. And really, we started to think about that as a short-term lease on a kind of valuable piece of San Francisco real estate. So we figured out that, just by putting a few coins in a parking meter, you could literally lease that 8 by 20 piece of real estate in San Francisco for, pennies to the dollar compared to, say, the lot next door that was supporting a commercial high-rise. So we started to brainstorm, well, let's lease the space and come up with some kind of use that we think can be useful or interesting or provocative. And we had a bunch of different ideas, but one of them was to insert a fragment of of open space to challenge the notion that, why do we subsidize space for storing vehicles? Let's insert a little fragment of green space in a place that really needs it in downtown San Francisco, where there wasn't a lot of parks and open space, and let's see what happens. Let's see how people respond to it. So we assembled the kind of elements of a urban park bench, grass, and a tree. We found a great spot in downtown San Francisco. We rolled up early in the morning. We put some coins in the parking meter. And we laid out the grass and the tree and the sod, and then we withdrew to watch and see what would happen. And in a matter of minutes, a couple people came along and sat down on the bench. Another person sat down on the tree, and they started having a conversation. And we said, yes, the project is a success. We created an opportunity for a social interaction in a place that was currently just storing a chunk of metal. So that was the origin of the parking project. And then in the subsequent years, it kind of grew and expanded to become an open source project, and eventually became Parking Day.
Okay. And so that growth period, did you anticipate it catching on the way it did, I guess, as a first question?
No, not at all.
Just a little local experiment to see what happens?
We just thought it would be a local experiment, and we actually researched the parking code to determine that it was not illegal to put something other than a car in a parking space. And it turns out the San Francisco parking code allows things other than cars to be stored in parking space. So we were actually operating within the bounds of the law as the way we understood it. It was we were sort of taking advantage of a loophole to allow for something which we think gave back a whole lot more to the urban setting than storing cars. And we did a little calculation, which was that if you look at the cross section of a street, how much of that space is allocated for people on foot or on bike, and how much of that is allocated for vehicle movement and storage. And it was about 25% was allocated to people, and 75% was allocated to vehicle movement and storage. And so we had this, realization that, wow, the streets in the city are potentially the largest public space that the city has. And yet we're allocating, 70 to 80% of that to vehicle movement and storage, which we don't think is the best use of that space. So we hadn't anticipated that would grow bigger than a kind of local experiment, but this was in 2005, and we posted pictures of the intervention on the internet, and very shortly thereafter we started to get contacted by people in other cities saying, "Hey, this is a cool idea. Can you come to Santa Monica and install one here? Can you come to Sicily, to Trapani, Italy, and install one here? Can you come to Scotland?" And we at that time we all had other jobs, full-time jobs, and we couldn't just pick up and sort of go to these places. And so we made a decision then to make the project open source. We created a how-to manual, basically a kind of an installation manual about how you in your own city could take that germ of an idea and recreate it in your own kind of in your own environment. And so we released that, we put that out on the internet, and that was the catalyst really the project growing to become Parking Day. Is that it was an act of generosity on our part to kind of kickstart the project. And then I think the idea of making the project open source really became the catalyst for it growing worldwide. And
so over the years and across the globe, what are some of the most creative interventions you've seen in parking days around the world?
Well, it's there's been some great there's been such great examples of it all over the planet, and I think the ones which I'm most interested in are the ones which continue to either, be provocative in terms of what the invitation or the offer is. For instance, in San Francisco, there was a free medical health clinic set up in a parking spot. In other areas, there's a hairdressing studio In many cities, there is a lack of open space. There's a lack of non-commercial gathering spaces, and so that itself is a kind of revolutionary act to carve out that small niche of space in that political context. So, for instance, in Tehran, Iran, there was a number of parking installations created just for neighbors to gather and have conversations in kind of a commercial, safe environment. So to me, the ones which are most inspiring are those which continue to push how we think about allocating urban space and who governs it and who uses it, and thinking about opportunities to really create that kind of act of generosity or an invitation, fulfill some kind of unmet social need in whatever is most kind of powerful and meaningful in that particular city.
Other interventions that have occurred during Parking Day include a wedding ceremony, a free head and neck massage, a glass recycling center, a finger painting studio, a public kiddie pool, a free bicycle repair shop, a croquet tournament, a public dog park, an open poetry reading, a barbecue, an art gallery, a dinner party, a public reading room, a public beach, a chicken coop, and the list goes on and on. Related to that, I wanted to chat with you about who does Parking Day. So with that idea and explanation that you just provided, does it matter necessarily who initiates Parking Day? It came from an interested citizen, civil society perspective primarily. Obviously, you're a professional in this realm, but more and more you see local governments having government-sanctioned Parking Day. Can you maybe talk about if you observed a distinction between the civil society-initiated ones and the local government, and any thoughts about potential tensions between those?
I don't see any tensions between the civil society and the local government. I think there's alignment there in terms of values. Often local government sees it as a way to kind of break through an impasse, to try to test new ideas, in a temporary way that's much less risky and much less costly than trying to do something permanent. And so there's a lot of alignment there. In fact, the whole idea of testing ideas in a short-term way is now, I think, a toolkit that many, many cities are using in order to advance their social, political, spatial agendas. So I actually think there's a lot of alignment among the civil society folks and local government, where I think there's sometimes misalignment is when you've got corporate entities who utilize that site or that space or that idea to kind of promote a product. And that's where it's just not, achieving the ambition of the project, at least from our perspective. We're totally fine if there's a corporate entity who wants to participate, but the ethos of the event is that it's an invitation, it's an act of generosity, and it's not about corporate promotion or marketing as much as it is about creating an opportunity for a community space, serving some kind of unmet need. So that's where I think there's tension over the years as we, commercial entities have tried to kind of take the idea and utilize it more for sort of a marketing branding objective than really for its roots, which I think are as an act of generosity and fulfilling some kind of unmet social need.
We had a guest on recently that started a local brewery here in Calgary, and we were talking about civic-minded businesses and how I think increasingly so citizens can distinguish between those genuine acts of generosity because it's built into that company's DNA versus this is a marketing ploy or something to put in our CSR report or things like that. So this is another manifestation of that, I think.
Sure. And, so Parking Day, I think, was the genesis of the Parklet program in San Francisco.
A parklet is a small seating area or green space created as a public space on or alongside a sidewalk. Parklets typically occupy what would otherwise be a roadside parking space. The Parklet program, launched in San Francisco in 2010, started with 5 pilot projects around the city. And today, you can find people sipping coffee, reading books, or just hanging out with friends in parklets around the world.
And, and that was a totally separate program initiated within city government by a couple of really visionary city planning folks, and and what Rebar pushed for as the city of San Francisco was creating the parklet program, was that the parklets themselves, which is this kind of semi-permanent version of parking day, would be free and open to the public. There's that they would be an extension of the sidewalk into the vehicular right of way, not an enclosure of a parking space for some kind of commercial use. So it's different than like a cafe table and chair permit, let's say, that many cities have, where you can kind of extend to the sidewalk to provide cafe tables and chairs of seating for your patrons only. In San Francisco, the parklet program, it's a public-private partnership, actually, with that the project sponsor, building the parklet and agreeing to maintain it. The city is offering the permit, but that parklet must be free and open to the public. Each of the parklets has a little sign which says, This is open to the public. Other cities have parklet programs that are different, and it's more about a commercial use, and I think that's fine. But for us, the big win was actually expanding public open space and the public realm into the vehicular right of way, and not necessarily kind of enclosing more space for private commercial use.
Right. And that signage, you can see it in, I've seen it when I've visited San Francisco, but other communities. And it's interesting how it's kind of funny that you actually have to do it, but it makes sense because it's adjacent to a business. And it in most instances, it seems it's not an either or proposition. I mean, if you've grabbed a coffee or you're having a Danish, you can still use that as a customer. But if you just want to read a book, you're welcome to, which I think is an interesting, it blends those two in a really interesting way that you don't often see in a lot of the city, and certainly larger scale projects are tough to do that.
And, I think also we have to acknowledge that many cities around the world, including a lot of cities in the U.S., have shrinking operations and maintenance budgets for their park and open space. And there's an increasing kind of move towards public-private partnerships and getting sponsorship. And I think broadly that's fulfilling a need. I think in an ideal world we would continue to invest in a civil society to be able to craft and support and maintain a robust public open space network and a school network and a kind of care network that was, I think more broadly available to more people. But it's a way of kind of filling a gap. And in San Francisco, we're probably one of the wealthiest cities on the West Coast, maybe even in the U.S. And still, our streets are falling apart. Our sidewalks are not that well maintained. Our municipal transit system, as great as it is kind of suffering from lack of investment. And so this has been a way for, from the city side, I think, to get these new chunks of open space without burdening the city in terms of the operations and maintenance burden. But there's been a secondary effect too, which is that this gives that project sponsor or that member of the public or that gallery or that bar or that restaurant, an opportunity to shape a little piece of the public realm. Actually, I think that's been one of the greatest outcomes, is that rather than it coming from sort of a top-down idea about, we're going to create these little micro parks and they're going to look like this and they're going to perform like this, that the expression in each individual parking day installation or each individual parklet really represents the kind of values, the vision of that particular person. And that just adds a lot of richness to the public realm, and particularly in the streets in San Francisco, we've got a lot of parklets. They're all different. And they all say something about who that person is or what that neighborhood is. And that, to me, is, I think, one of the greatest kind of benefits or interests in the program. And I think many cities are looking for more ways to open up avenues for citizens to participate in shaping part of the public realm. And it's I think it's in different social and political contexts. I think the mandate is different. I think in the U.S., where we underfund underfund investment in public realm. This is where the public is stepping forward to kind of fill the gap. And I think contexts like Scandinavia, Northern Europe, we have a very well invested civil society. Actually, there the greatest need is getting citizen participation. Right? Is about.
Right, because the government looks after it so well.
People say, we trust government. We trust the politicians to handle that. Well, why should I give more or contribute or shape in a way? And so this is an invitation in those types of contexts to actually cultivate a different level of civil engagement, beyond the public meeting and the participatory budgeting, but actually to get out there and physically shape and program and activate part of the public realm, which gives it that nuance and kind of expresses that individual identity, that particular neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting how you can see in both of those contexts you've described how the parklet types of initiatives create, in the U.S. example, they create increased ownership and engagement of a public sphere, which, hopefully in some small or even big way starts to link back into the realization that public investment is actually a good thing. But if I'm not engaged with it, I don't pay attention to it, I don't care, keep my taxes low. So it's interesting. And just recently in the last year or two, I've ridden the new transit in Detroit and in Cincinnati, both heavily or exclusively funded by private. And it, like you say, it fills a gap, and it's a great addition to the city. But as from my Canadian perspective, it's insane to me that it has to come to that because of the level of funding. But like you say, you work all over the world, and so to understand how these interventions can assist in a particular context is obviously hugely valuable. So, so the last question I have for you is something we ask everybody that we talk to is if you can share a city that you love and why you love it.
That's tough.
Most guests cheat and they do 2 or 5,
okay.
But we try to go with 1.
Okay. Well, I'll say that so we parking day was 2005. We launched Rebar as a full-time art and design practice in 2009. That gave me an opportunity to see more places around the planet, see more cities, work in more cities. Joining GEL in 2013, GEL's an international practice. It's a very small, relatively small size firm. It's about 75 people, but we've worked in 250 cities around the world and continue to. And so, I think part of my job as an urbanist is to go to these cities and understand what makes them tick. What is their DNA? What is their local DNA? How are they handling transit? What's the mix of public and private and, expression in public open space, expression in private space, and how are they handling affordable housing? I'm so curious now about what makes a great city and what it is that, like, beneath the surface that really makes it tick. And so as a student of cities, I would say it's hard for me to select just one, because I could say for a great transit city, I would say, like Melbourne, for instance, has an incredible tram network and just an unbelievable subway system that they're now expanding, and an incredibly vibrant and well-designed downtown. But for, say, the relationship between urbanism and nature, I would choose Hong Kong, and Hong Kong Island, actually, which has these incredible vertical urbanism. And, we talk about ground floor activation, in Hong Kong, the ground floor is the first 5 floors of the building. And the kind of public realm extends from the street up into the kind of, first, the first several stories of the building. But then you've got In Hong Kong Island, this zone of protection of the watershed that's been in place since the early 1900s, which means that you can be in this hyper dense urbanism, and then a 10-minute walk away, you're in a forest overlooking Victoria Bay. So that to me it's kind of a magical city in that way. If you're talking about cities that are great for public art, let's say, I actually think, Miami and the Wynwood district in Miami is just an outstanding example of public art, a kind of a canvas. Every building is a canvas, and the kind of work being produced, in galleries and on the street is just, it's quite remarkable in terms of the thriving culture of street art happening in Miami. So, it's hard for me to choose one, Maybe my favorite city of the moment would be, I'd have to say it's Copenhagen, because of some recent experiences there. Copenhagen over the last 40, 50 years, as you know, working with Jan Gehl and many, many others, and the city's own well-planned government and bureaucracy have done an incredible job of expanding their public space network and embracing Copenhagen Harbor, which was once a kind of industrial polluted harbor. Now it's clean. A number of harbor baths have been built. A number of acquisitions have been made to create a link between the city's open space network to that waterfront. And now, over the last just 5 years, investing in a number of new pedestrian and bike bridges that cross over that harbor. And so it's a magical setting, particularly on a warm day in summer when just the harbor is alive with people, and the density of people spending time in public space and moving through the city by bike is unparalleled, I think, in terms of the vibrancy of public life that I've witnessed in other cities. So it's also top on my list.
Inspired by my conversation with John, the Intelligent Futures team created a parking day intervention of our own this year. Our super intern Alistair went online and found all the parts we needed: a Jeep Cherokee bumper, the back seat of a Dodge Caravan, a few car tires, 10 square feet of AstroTurf, and some fresh plants. We created a public space for people to sit in and hang out in that was in the shape of a deconstructed vehicle. Our project may not have received as much traction as the free medical clinic that John mentioned, but it was really fun to put together and to do some urban experimentation right outside our studio. It was especially fun to see the confused look on the face of the parking enforcement officer who drove by multiple times, but unfortunately he never got out of his vehicle for a conversation. If you attended Parking Day this year, we'd love to hear about your favorite project. If you missed this year's Urbanist Holiday, don't worry. You now have 354 days to brainstorm for your installation in 2019. 360 Degree City is created by the team at Intelligent Futures. To learn more about the work we do, you can go to intelligentfutures.ca. If you like the podcast, please share it with someone that might be interested in seeing their own city from a different angle. We would love it if you subscribed and reviewed the podcast, and would love to hear your feedback. If you have any suggestions for future guests or topics that you'd like us to cover, get in touch with us on our website or any of our social accounts. I'm John Lewis. Thanks for stopping by.